Dear learners, welcome back to WSE True Stories, where English learning becomes an unforgettable journey through the lives of the world's most inspiring people. Today, we explore a name that echoes across generations, not just in cinema, but in the hearts of those who believe in the power of laughter, kindness, and silent resistance. Charlie Chaplin. A man without a voice, who spoke louder than anyone else. A man born into poverty, who made millions feel rich in spirit. A man whose iconic character, the Tramp, wore oversized shoes and a bowler hat, yet walked boldly through the chaos of the 20th century. In today's story, you'll improve your English listening and vocabulary skills, but also something more. You'll feel the bittersweet beauty of hope in the darkest places, and discover how a simple man with no words changed the way we see comedy, power, and human dignity. This isn't just a history lesson. It's a journey through shadows and spotlights. Through tears and laughter. Through silent films that screamed against injustice louder than politics ever could. So, how does a hungry, abandoned boy from Victorian London become one of the most beloved artists of all time? Get ready for a story full of struggle, genius, and gentle rebellion. Because the world didn't give Chaplin a stage, he built it, one silent frame at a time. Let's begin. To understand Charlie Chaplin, we must first step into the foggy streets of late 19th century London, a city bursting with energy, yet divided by deep social inequality. It was the age of Queen Victoria, the Industrial Revolution, and horse-drawn carriages echoing across cobblestone alleys. But beneath the surface of grandeur and empire, millions of working-class families lived in overcrowded slums, surviving hand-to-mouth. Charlie Chaplin was born in this world on April 16, 1889. His full name was Charles Spencer Chaplin, and from the very beginning, life offered no comfort. His parents were both entertainers in the struggling world of London's music halls. His father, Charles Chaplin Sr., was a singer and alcoholic who abandoned the family when Charlie was still a baby. His mother, Hannah Chaplin, known on stage as Lily Harley, was a singer and actress, beloved for her delicate voice. But even her talent could not shield the family from poverty. They were always on the move, from one tiny room to the next, barely affording rent. When Hannah's voice began to fail, her stage career ended, and with no income, the family spiraled into despair. Charlie and his older half-brother Sidney found themselves in and out of workhouses, places meant to house the poor but often associated with harsh conditions and humiliation. For Charlie, hunger was not a metaphor. He remembered going days with nothing to eat, watching his mother go without food so her children could have something on their plates. Yet it wasn't just physical hardship that marked his early life. It was witnessing the slow breakdown of his mother's mental health, worsened by poverty, rejection, and malnutrition. Eventually, she was sent to an asylum. Charlie was just 7 years old. Still, there was one escape from all this: the stage. When his mother could still perform, she would sometimes bring Charlie backstage. He watched the lights, the costumes, the laughter of audiences. Something in him sparked, a sense that the stage wasn't just about fame, but about transformation. Here, even the poorest man could become a king, or at least make the king laugh. By age 9, Charlie was performing small acts in front of crowds. By 13, he had joined a touring comedy troupe. While still a boy, he was already learning timing, expression, and how to captivate an audience, tools that would later make him a legend. But no one looking at young Charlie in those early years, barefoot, hungry, abandoned, could have imagined what he would become. Still, somewhere inside that thin, wide-eyed boy, a question was forming. Can suffering be turned into laughter? And if so, could laughter become a kind of truth? He would spend the rest of his life trying to answer it. Charlie's early entry into the world of performance was not glamorous. It wasn't applause or ambition that brought him to the stage, it was survival. By the time he was 10, the streets of London were his school, and humor became his shield. After his mother was institutionalized, Charlie and his brother Sidney were left almost entirely on their own. They spent time in charity homes, some kinder than others. But there was a constant ache in Charlie's chest, a longing for security, for belonging, and for the return of his mother's soft voice singing in the dim glow of stage lights. That emotional wound never fully healed. Yet from it, Charlie began to develop a unique sensitivity. He became observant, intensely so. He watched how people walked, how they reacted when surprised, embarrassed, or ashamed. These observations later became the foundation for his silent comedy. But his first performances were modest. He joined a clog dancing troupe called the 8 Lancashire Lads. They toured factories and low-end theatres across England. Though Charlie had no formal education, he read whenever he could, and soaked up ideas like a sponge. What he lacked in academic learning, he made up for in wit, expression, and a near-mystical understanding of human behavior. Still, he wasn't sure who he really was. Was he meant to be a dancer? A clown? A dramatic actor? Then, at age 17, he landed a small part in a comedy sketch for the Carnot Troupe, one of Britain's most famous stage companies. The show was called A Night in an English Music Hall, and Charlie played a drunkard. It was a brief role, but he brought it to life with such originality. His stumbling, squinting character brought audiences to tears of laughter. For the first time, Charlie felt the full electricity of a crowd reacting to his every move. Fred Carnot, the company's founder, noticed. Charlie was soon promoted and began touring not just around Britain, but also in America. His trip to the United States in 1910 was a revelation. America was fast, bold, and full of opportunity. It was also home to the booming motion picture industry, which was still in its silent infancy. When he returned home to London in 1912, Charlie was no longer a boy scraping for coins. He was a performer with growing ambition. But this ambition came with fear. The stage gave him freedom, but also reminded him of everything he had lost. He often portrayed drunkards or clowns, figures that danced on the edge of sadness and humor, always hiding something behind their masks. And perhaps that was his real challenge, how to express sorrow without surrendering to it. How to create comedy from pain, without making fun of the pain itself. At the time, silent films were spreading fast in America. They didn't require translation, they spoke in gestures and emotions, and they reached people of all classes and nations. Charlie saw in film what he had seen on stage as a child, transformation. But now, the possibilities were endless. Yet he hesitated. Crossing the Atlantic permanently meant leaving behind his roots, his mother, and the streets that had shaped him. It also meant entering a new world, where competition was fierce, and failure could be swift. But one invitation changed everything. In 1913, he was offered a film contract by Keystone Studios in California. It was a terrifying choice. But Charlie, even in fear, carried with him one unshakable belief. If I can make them laugh without saying a word, then maybe, just maybe, I can make them feel everything. He said yes. But this was only the beginning. The hardest test, the one that would define him, was still waiting in the new world. Charlie Chaplin arrived in California with a suitcase, a small contract, and a head full of doubt. The year was 1914, and Hollywood was still a dusty outpost of dreams. Keystone Studios, run by Mack Sennett, was known for slapstick comedy, films that relied on wild chases, custard pies, and exaggerated chaos. Charlie's first few days on set were confusing. There were no scripts, just vague ideas shouted by directors. Actors improvised wildly. The style was chaotic, nothing like the structured comedy sketches he had performed in England. At first, he felt out of place. But Charlie was a quiet rebel. He didn't believe comedy needed to be loud to be funny. He believed in the small gestures, the tilt of a hat, the twitch of a mustache, the power of a pause. So when Sennett asked him to create a character for a short comedy called Mabel's Strange Predicament, Charlie made a choice that would change his life and film history. He threw together a costume, oversized trousers, a tight coat, a bowler hat, a bamboo cane, and a tiny mustache. He looked ridiculous. But as soon as he stepped in front of the camera, something clicked. He became the Tramp, a wandering, gentle soul with a child's heart and a clown's grace. Someone who walked with dignity even when life knocked him down. Audiences were instantly captivated. Within months, Charlie went from a newcomer to a sensation. His salary rose from $150 to $1,250 per week, an unheard-of jump. People lined up to see the Tramp. What was it about this silent figure that moved people so deeply? Perhaps it was this: Charlie made comedy human. He wasn't mocking others, he was revealing himself. Behind the gags and pratfalls, there was always a glimmer of sadness, of hope, of love lost and found. He was funny, yes, but he was also vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, millions saw themselves. But with fame came new challenges. Charlie was still young, and success brought pressure. He began directing his own films to maintain control over his vision, but that meant working nonstop, writing, directing, acting, editing. He became a perfectionist, sometimes filming over 300 takes for a single scene. Crew members were exhausted. Critics began to question his ego. Still, he kept pushing. He didn't want to just make people laugh, he wanted to make them feel. In 1915 and 1916, he released films like The Tramp, The Bank, and The Vagabond, each more emotional than the last. He began weaving romance, heartbreak, and subtle political commentary into his comedies. In Easy Street, he played a hero who battles a violent bully, echoing the social unrest of the time. In The Immigrant, he portrayed the humiliation and hope of newcomers to America, a story close to his heart. But not everyone appreciated his deeper themes. Some studio executives wanted simple, profitable slapstick. Others criticized him for being too sentimental or too political. Charlie faced a choice: should he play it safe and stick to formula? Or take risks and trust that audiences wanted more than just laughter? He chose the latter. And this made him a target. Some called him arrogant. Others questioned whether he was loyal to American values. But Charlie didn't back down. He believed that film wasn't just entertainment, it was a mirror of society, and he had a duty to reflect both its joys and injustices. His growing influence gave him power, but also isolation. He had no formal education, no strong ties to Hollywood's elite, and few close friends. His perfectionism made collaboration difficult. And despite his growing wealth, he never fully escaped the loneliness he had known as a child. Still, he worked tirelessly. And yet, behind the brilliance, something was building, a challenge that would force him to confront not just the world, but himself. What happens when a performer becomes a voice for the voiceless? And what price do you pay when laughter turns into protest? It was 1918. The world was at war. And while nations battled on distant fronts, Charlie Chaplin was preparing for his boldest artistic move yet. By this time, he was one of the most recognizable faces in the world. His character, the Tramp, had become an international symbol of underdogs everywhere. He was earning more than the President of the United States, and his films were making millions. But Charlie wasn't satisfied. Something in him had shifted. He had seen too much suffering to remain silent. The war had left families torn apart, economies crippled, and soldiers shattered. Charlie, though not a soldier himself, felt the weight of this global tragedy. And he wanted to use his art not just to entertain, but to awaken. So he made a bold choice, to step outside of pure comedy and into controversy. He began working on Shoulder Arms, a film that would satirize war itself. The idea was radical. How could you make a comedy about something so tragic, so fresh in people's wounds? Studios were nervous. Advisors warned him that audiences wouldn't laugh, that they might be outraged. But Charlie believed that humor could reveal truths that words could not. He moved forward, fully aware that one wrong move could ruin his career. Shoulder Arms was released in 1918. It showed the Tramp as a hapless soldier, bumbling his way through the horrors of World War I. It was funny, but behind the gags was a powerful message, that war was absurd, and the people who fought in it were often victims of decisions made far above their heads. To everyone's surprise, the film was a massive success. Soldiers, veterans, and everyday people filled theaters. They didn't see disrespect, they saw honesty. And for the first time, cinema had proven that it could criticize power while still making people laugh. This moment marked a turning point. Charlie had learned something crucial, that his audience trusted him. And with that trust came responsibility. He was no longer just a performer, he was a cultural force. And he would carry that awareness into the next phase of his life. But the world around him was also changing. In the 1920s, America entered a time of prosperity, but also suspicion. The rise of industrial capitalism, fear of communism, and deepening inequalities created an anxious society. People wanted distraction, not reflection. But Charlie, who had grown up watching his mother lose her voice, his father lose his life, and children lose their futures, couldn't look away. He began writing The Kid, a story about a poor man who finds an abandoned child and raises him as his own. It was deeply personal. The boy in the film, played by Jackie Coogan, was based on Charlie himself, fragile, joyful, full of longing. And the story was about more than poverty. It was about love in a world that had forgotten how to care. The film was nearly destroyed before it was ever seen. During a divorce dispute with his first wife, legal authorities tried to seize the negatives as part of her financial claim. Charlie was terrified. He smuggled the film reels across state lines, cut the film secretly in a hotel room, and risked everything to finish it. When The Kid premiered in 1921, audiences were stunned. They laughed, they cried, and for many, it was the first time they had seen a film that blended comedy and tragedy so powerfully. The film broke records. It became one of the most beloved movies of the silent era. But more importantly, it proved that Chaplin's instincts were right. Cinema wasn't just entertainment, it was emotion, memory, protest, and hope. And yet, with great success came even greater scrutiny. As Charlie became more vocal about class inequality, war, and injustice, he started drawing fire from powerful people. Some accused him of being un-American. Others whispered that he was too sympathetic to the poor, too critical of the elite. He didn't stop. He couldn't. But one question haunted him more than any other: could he continue to speak the truth and still survive in a system that rewarded silence? That question would define the next stage of his life. And it would lead to the most controversial and courageous film he would ever make. The year was 1940. The world was once again at war. And this time, Charlie Chaplin saw evil rising that he could no longer ignore. Across Europe, Adolf Hitler had seized power and begun spreading hatred, violence, and authoritarianism. Millions were already suffering. The United States, however, was still on the sidelines. Hollywood remained largely silent, afraid to provoke, afraid to lose overseas markets. But Chaplin, the master of silent cinema, decided it was time to speak. And not with gestures or mime, but with words. He had been watching newsreels closely. The mustache, the strut, the overblown pride, Hitler reminded him eerily of his own character, the Tramp. It was a chilling coincidence. But Charlie had an idea. What if he used that resemblance to strike back, to expose the dictator's absurdity? He began writing The Great Dictator, a satirical film that would mock Hitler directly, while warning the world of fascism's danger. It was his most dangerous project yet. There were threats. He was told he'd lose audiences. He was told it was not his place to speak about politics. But Chaplin believed it was everyone's place. And for the first time, he would step out of character and speak from the heart. The production was long, tense, and emotionally draining. The script balanced comedy and rage. He played two roles: a ruthless dictator named Adenoid Hinkle, and a humble Jewish barber caught in the chaos. The film showed the rise of fascism, but also the power of kindness, memory, and resistance. Then came the moment that would define Chaplin's legacy. At the end of the film, the Jewish barber, mistaken for the dictator, is pushed to give a speech to the world. It's not a joke. It's not a scene. It's Charlie himself, speaking directly to the audience, breaking the fourth wall. In that speech, he pleads for humanity. For peace. For unity. He condemns hatred, calls out greed, and dares to dream of a world where science serves the soul, not destroys it. It was the first major time Charlie spoke in a film, and every word echoed like thunder. When The Great Dictator was released, the world was stunned. Some praised its bravery. Others called it dangerous. In Europe, where the war raged on, it gave hope to the oppressed. In America, it stirred debate. Could a comedian really do this? Should he? But the bigger question was, if not now, then when? If not Chaplin, then who? The film was nominated for 5 Academy Awards. But more than that, it became a symbol of resistance. And Chaplin, once just the funny man with the cane, was now something else entirely, an artist of conscience. Yet with courage came consequence. Over the next years, Chaplin's political activism grew louder. He spoke out for workers. For peace. For racial justice. He refused to take American citizenship, which angered many. Soon, the FBI opened a file on him. He was accused of being a communist, though he never joined any party. He was labeled un-American, though he had lived in the U.S. for decades. Public opinion, once adoring, began to fracture. And then, in 1952, during a trip to London to premiere another film, the U.S. government revoked his re-entry permit. Charlie Chaplin, one of the most beloved icons in American history, was exiled without a trial, without a charge. He was 63 years old. Imagine this, a man who had brought joy to millions, suddenly declared unwelcome by the very nation he helped inspire. And here's a question for you. Should an artist be punished for their opinions if they don't break the law? Or is speaking out part of their duty? Comment below, your thoughts might surprise someone else reading. Chaplin and his family settled in Switzerland, heartbroken yet resilient. He never returned to live in the U.S. again. But he never stopped creating. His sacrifice was immense, not just the land he loved, but the adoration he once knew. Yet in giving up comfort, he gained something deeper, the power to stand for truth, no matter the cost. And in time, the world would begin to understand just how brave that sacrifice was. But before that recognition would come, he still had one more battle to face, one not on the screen, but within himself. Switzerland became Chaplin's quiet haven, a place to reflect, to create, and to heal. But though he was far from Hollywood, his influence only grew. Even in exile, he wasn't finished. In 1957, Chaplin released A King in New York, a biting satire of American culture and McCarthyism. It mocked consumerism, paranoia, and the witch hunt mentality that had driven him out. The film was banned in the United States for years, yet in Europe, it was celebrated. People saw it as the voice of someone who had suffered injustice and refused to stay silent. Though his screen appearances became fewer, Chaplin continued to write, compose music, and direct. His silent masterpieces were restored and re-released across the globe. A new generation discovered city lights, modern times, and the kid, and marveled at how these black and white images could make them laugh and cry without a single word. By the 1960s, attitudes had begun to shift. A new wave of filmmakers, Truffaut, Kubrick, Fellini, cited Chaplin as a master of the form. Young actors studied his timing, his emotional expression, his ability to blend tragedy and comedy. And audiences? They watched the Tramp stumble and smile, and saw themselves. In a world now filled with color, noise, and speed, Chaplin's quiet, thoughtful style became even more precious. Then, something remarkable happened. In 1972, 20 years after his exile, the United States invited Chaplin back to receive an honorary Oscar for the incalculable effect he has had in making motion pictures the art form of this century. The moment he stepped onto the stage, the entire audience at the Academy Awards rose in a standing ovation that lasted over 12 minutes, one of the longest in Oscar history. Chaplin stood there, older now, moved to tears. The man once labeled a threat had returned as a legend. And the nation that once feared his voice now celebrated his genius. But perhaps the greatest achievement wasn't the awards, or even the applause. It was this: Chaplin proved that art can speak louder than fear. That laughter can challenge power. That a poor boy from London, born into hunger and hardship, could move the hearts of presidents, peasants, and poets alike. He was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II in 1975, becoming Sir Charles Spencer Chaplin. It was an honor not just for his artistry, but for his unwavering spirit. By the end of his life, he had made over 80 films. Many are now considered essential to the history of cinema. But more than that, he had made an impact on the human heart. His most famous creation, the Tramp, became a universal figure, wandering, gentle, always hopeful. In every stumble, he reflected our own struggles. In every smile, he reminded us that kindness survives. And here's something to think about. In today's world of fast content, loud opinions, and viral trends, could someone like Charlie Chaplin still rise? Or have we forgotten how to listen to silence? Chaplin passed away peacefully on Christmas Day, 1977, at the age of 88. But his legacy? Still alive. Still smiling. His story was no longer just about films. It was about fighting with humor, daring to be human, and leaving the world better than he found it. And in the next part of our journey, we'll reflect on what he stood for, and why his message still matters now, perhaps more than ever. What makes a legacy last? For some, it's power. For others, wealth. But for Charlie Chaplin, it was something more subtle and more profound. He gave us a new way to see the world. Through the eyes of a quiet man in baggy pants and a bowler hat, Chaplin reminded us of what it means to be human, fragile, hopeful, foolish, and brave, all at once. The Tramp may have been silent, but his silence spoke louder than most speeches. It's no accident that Chaplin rose during some of the most turbulent decades of modern history. World wars, economic collapse, political extremism, he lived through it all. And yet, instead of preaching, he chose to make people laugh. And in doing so, he made them think. His films exposed injustice, but always with grace. They criticized cruelty, but with compassion. He mocked power not to destroy it, but to reveal its absurdity. In The Great Dictator, he warned against the dangers of authoritarianism, but he ended not with hate, but with hope. In one of cinema's most powerful monologues, Chaplin's voice, usually silent, finally speaks. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. That speech wasn't just a scene in a movie. It was a message to the world. Today, we live in an age overflowing with messages, most loud, many angry. But how many carry the depth and humility of Chaplin's words? His legacy reminds us that art doesn't need to be complex to be powerful. That a glance, a stumble, or a quiet smile can reveal more than 1,000 words. That sometimes, silence is the most honest voice. But perhaps his most enduring lesson is this. You can come from nothing and still create beauty. You can be mocked and still rise. You can be silenced and still speak to the world. Chaplin didn't invent cinema, but he elevated it. He didn't set out to change the world, but he did. With a cane, a hat, and a heart full of courage, he left footprints not just on the screen, but on the soul of humanity. So here's a question for you, one that goes beyond the story itself. In a world full of noise, do we still listen to the quiet truths? And if Chaplin were alive today, how would the Tramp walk through our modern world? Would he still find a way to make us laugh and think? As we approach the final part of our journey, we'll close with a moment of reflection, a final tribute, and a spark of inspiration for your own path, both in learning English and in living meaningfully. Dear learners, thank you for joining me on this journey through the life of Charlie Chaplin. From a poor child performing in the slums of London to one of the most iconic artists in history, Chaplin's story is more than a biography, it's a reflection of human resilience, creativity, and dignity. He didn't use violence to fight injustice. He used laughter. He didn't shout to be heard. He simply paid attention to the world, then showed it back to us, just slightly bent, a little sad, and surprisingly hopeful. What does this mean for you? It means your voice doesn't have to be loud to matter. It means your story, no matter how humble it begins, can make others feel something powerful. And it means that even when the world feels overwhelming, small acts of kindness, humor, and courage can still ripple far and wide. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who could use a little hope today. Maybe someone who's struggling, or someone who dreams quietly, like Chaplin once did. Like, comment, and subscribe to stay with us on this journey through English and through stories that matter. And now, a question for you. If you were the tramp, walking through today's world, what message would you carry in silence? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, keep learning, keep feeling, and keep sharing your voice, no matter how soft it may be. Goodbye for now.